Hey everyone, our next question is another good one, and it is this. Should I feel bad if I share the gospel and someone responds badly? And another way it was asked is, how do I know if it will work? Here's what we know from Scripture. Number one, Jesus kind of tells us that it just won't always go well. Sometimes it's going to go badly. Actually, if we think about it, the fact that Jesus himself was persecuted and killed, it shouldn't surprise us that some people may not respond well to hearing about Jesus. And that when that happens, it's not that we did something bad or that we should feel bad, but that's what happened to Jesus himself. And that's what he said would happen to us as we told others about him. And he says that not as a, since it might not go well, don't do it. No, he says, you need to be doing this. Your command from me is to go and to make disciples, to teach them to obey. And that's actually just the expectation from him, that his people tell people about him. And it may not always go well. Actually, even in Jesus' own life, when he was teaching, a lot of people rejected him. Sometimes his own family thought he was crazy and didn't believe him. The people sometimes closest to him, some of his disciples, didn't respond well to his teachings. And then many of the crowds were fickle. At times they'd come around him and listen to him, and others they'd desert him because of something that he said. The religious leaders of the day even disagreed with him and were willing to kill him. And so it shouldn't surprise us when we share the gospel and it doesn't go well. And yet, that shouldn't keep us from sharing the gospel, because Jesus says that he's with us till the very end of the age, that he's there, and he will reward us. As we tell people about him, he's going to be the one that tells the Father about us. That actually part of who we are in him is just witnesses to him, people who testify to him. And he promises that as we're willing to testify about him in this life, he'll be willing to testify about us and our faith in the life to come. And the reality is, we don't know it'll always work. Actually, in Romans chapter 10, look this up. Romans chapter 10, starting in verse 9, says this: if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For the scripture says, everyone who believes on him will not be put to shame, since there is no distinction between Jew or Greek, because the same Lord of all richly blesses all who call on him. Again, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So that's the good news, that everyone who calls on Jesus' name can have salvation. And whoever's willing to put their faith in and follow Jesus, who's to turn from their old life and to confess allegiance to Jesus alone and be baptized into him. But then it says this, and starting in verse 14, how then can they call on him, sorry for the froggy voice, how then can they call on him whom they have not believed in? And how can they believe without hearing? And how can they hear without a preacher? And how can they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. The reality is, people can't be saved unless they hear the gospel. And they can't hear the gospel unless someone speaks the gospel. And they can't speak the gospel unless someone sends them. And so our job as the leaders of the church are to send you to preach the gospel so they can hear the gospel and be saved. But then look at verse 16. But not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed our message? It's not always going to work. You could say all the right words in the right way at the right time, and it may not work because people's hearts are hard. They may not be ready to hear. They may not be ready to respond to that truth. But that doesn't mean we don't do it, number one, and that doesn't mean we stop. We keep telling, we keep sowing that seed of truth so that someday it may grow and become their own faith, and that they may be saved. So hope that helps. See you soon.